All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're heading over to Senegal.
Uh-huh.
But we're going to be looking at it with a bit of a twist.
Okay.
We're going to be checking out the upcoming legislative elections.
Gotcha.
And specifically, looking at those elections through the lens of the diaspora.
Interesting.
And we're going to be looking at a candidate who's actually
Right.
making them a really central part of his campaign.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how candidates are really starting to recognize the growing influence for
Exactly.
the diaspora, especially in countries like Senegal.
Exactly.
It's such a large diaspora.
Yeah. And our main source that we're looking at today is an interview with Abu Sonko,
Mm-hmm.
who is a candidate running in France for the PASTEF party.
Right.
And what makes this even more interesting is where this interview takes place.
Oh.
It's on this outlet called La Chaîne Soninke,
Oh?
which is a media outlet that really specifically caters to the Soninke diaspora.
You hit the nail on the head. This isn't just any interview. Choosing Soninke as the platform is strategic.
Yeah.
If you take a look at their website, they have everything
Yeah.
from news and cultural discussions
Wow.
to even live concerts.
I saw that.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So Sonko's tapping into very specific community here.
It seems like savvy politicians are realizing the power of these really niche media outlets,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
instead of these broad generic messages, going on the nightly news. or whatever.
We're targeted.
They're going very targeted.
Yeah.
So let's dive into what Sonko is selling to this specific audience.
Okay.
One of the big things he talks about is bringing the diaspora back to Senegal,
Uh-huh.
especially economically.
Yes.
And
what's interesting is that
Yeah.
he acknowledges that past attempts to entice people to return
right.
haven't been successful.
Yeah, he uses the word failure,
Yeah.
like specifically.
He doesn't shy away from
He
it.
does not shy away from it.
He actually uses it to his advantage.
Yeah?
He points to those failures as examples of ineffective methods
Yeah.
and contrasts that with PASTEF's long-term vision.
And he specifically mentions this Horizon 2050
Yeah.
a lot.
Mhm.
What exactly is that?
Horizon 2050 is PASTEF's 25-year plan
Wow.
for Senegal.
Okay.
So it's this incredibly detailed
Wow.
roadmap for the country's future.
Wow.
And Sonko uses it to build trust, essentially saying, look, we're not just offering quick fixes. We have a long-term strategy.
I can see how that might appeal to people.
Yeah,
But wouldn't a plan that long-term also
No.
make it difficult to adapt to changes?
that's a very valid point.
Right.
Yeah.
The world's pretty unpredictable.
It raises the question of flexibility.
Yeah.
Can a plan crafted today really address the challenges of tomorrow,
Right.
especially over such a long period?
And this focus on long-term vision seems to tie into his economic plans for the diaspora, too.
Yes.
He keeps mentioning this concept of a diaspora bank.
Right. He wants to create a financial institution,
Oh, wow.
specifically for the diaspora,
Interesting.
hoping to capture the savings that are currently sitting in foreign banks.
Okay, so that's a pretty bold idea.
It is.
What do you think? Could that actually work?
It's certainly intriguing.
It sounds like it could unlock a lot of potential capital, but
Right, like you said.
I imagine there would be tons of challenges.
There are huge hurdles.
Yeah.
He'd have to navigate regulatory approvals, figure out international banking laws,
Right.
and most importantly, build trust.
Right.
Remember, he himself admits that previous attempts to engage the diaspora financially haven't been successful.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of skepticism to overcome.
This emphasis on long-term vision also brings us to Sonko's legislative agenda.
Okay.
And there's this interesting moment in the interview where he gets into a bit of a debate with the interviewer about having pre-written bills.
Oh, interesting.
And it seems like Sonko links that back to this Horizon 2050 thing.
Exactly.
You know?
He stresses that PASTEF has been developing these policies for years,
Right.
carefully crafting them to align with this grand vision.
Right?
It's almost like he's saying,
Yeah.
we've done our homework,
Right.
we're ready to hit the ground running.
It sounds like he's really trying to project this image of preparedness and competence
Absolutely.
to voters who might be tired of empty promises.
Absolutely. But again, it circles back to that question of adaptability. Can a plan devised years ago truly remain relevant
Right.
in a constantly changing world?
Before we get too deep into the weeds of policy specifics,
Or-
I want to highlight something that really struck me about this interview.
Okay.
It wasn't just the words, but also the way Sonko used language
Oh,
to connect with his audience.
right. I noticed that too.
Yeah.
There's this moment where he starts speaking Soninke.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the interviewer actually encourages him to use more Soninke phrases.
Yeah.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
It really shows how Lashane Soninke
Right.
isn't just providing a platform.
Yeah.
They're actively shaping the conversation and representing their community.
And that speaks volumes about Sonko's strategy, too.
Right.
Not just talking about the diaspora,
Yes.
he's actively engaging with them on a cultural level.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful move, particularly in a diverse nation like Senegal.
It seems like he's trying to position himself as someone who understands their cultural nuances
Yes.
and can bridge the gap between Senegal and its diaspora.
It's a fascinating example of how politicians are navigating this increasingly complex world of diaspora engagement.
While economic opportunities are crucial, Sonko also addresses the social needs of the diaspora during the interview.
Right.
He uses student housing as a specific example.
Yes, it's a very real challenge
Yeah.
for many Senegalese students
Sure.
studying abroad.
Yeah.
Sonko highlights the need to advocate for them
Right?
and work collaboratively with existing government structures to improve their living conditions.
What's interesting is that he doesn't promise to single-handedly solve the problem.
Right.
Instead, he emphasizes working within the system
Yes.
to find solutions.
More pragmatic approach than we often see in
Right.
political campaigns.
He talks about using his position to push for better policies and support.
Instead of grand promises,
Right.
he's highlighting realistic strategies for enacting change.
It makes you wonder, though,
Yeah.
if working within the system is enough
Yeah.
to truly address the complex issues facing the diaspora.
That's a great question.
Do you think they're looking for more radical change?
It probably varies depending on the individual and their experiences.
Right.
Some might be content with a representative who can effectively navigate the system
Yeah.
and advocate for their needs, while others might be looking for someone who promises to disrupt the status quo.
It really highlights the diverse perspectives
Absolutely.
within the diaspora
Yeah.
and the challenges of representing such a varied group.
And that complexity is exactly what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
It forces us to consider the evolving role of the diaspora in shaping their home countries.
Right.
And the different approaches politicians are taking to engage with them. It's interesting how Sonko balances this pragmatic approach with kind of these bold pronouncements.
Right.
You know, remember that legislative rupture he kept mentioning?
Oh, yeah.
That promise to break from the past?
Yeah, it sounds a bit like the hope and change strategy, right?
Right, exactly.
The question is, can Sonko deliver on this, rupture without getting into the nitty-gritty?
Yeah.
That might actually scare some voters away.
Exactly. It's a tightrope walk.
Yeah.
You want to inspire, but you also don't want to overpromise.
Right.
And it's particularly tricky when you're appealing to the diaspora, a
Right.
group that might be skeptical after years of feeling ignored or misunderstood.
Speaking of skepticism, let's circle back to immigration.
Okay.
It's a hot-button issue, especially in France.
Yeah.
Where Sonko is campaigning.
Yeah.
And he talks about this diaspora agenda,
Uh-huh.
but doesn't really delve into specifics on immigration policy.
That's a key omission, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
He's courting the diaspora vote.
Right.
But how much can he actually influence immigration policy?
Right.
Especially given international agreements and conventions.
It's complicated.
Very.
Like, these agreements often limit what individual countries can do on their own.
Absolutely.
So even if Sonko gets elected and champions this diaspora agenda,
Yeah.
he'd be facing an uphill battle.
It highlights the limitations of a single legislator,
Right.
even one with a strong mandate.
Right.
It also underscores the importance of understanding the complexities of these issues.
Right.
Immigration isn't just about opening or closing borders.
Right.
It's a web of legal frameworks, economic factors, and social considerations.
This begs the question, is Sonko being realistic about what he can achieve?
Right?
Or is he simply playing to the diaspora's hopes and frustrations?
It's tough to say for sure,
Right.
but it's a question worth pondering.
Yeah, definitely.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Especially if you're part of the diaspora and weighing your options in this election.
Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something a little bit more concrete.
Okay.
Sonko brings up the challenge of student housing during the interview,
Right?
and he uses it as an example of how he would address the social needs of the diaspora.
That's a smart move. It's a relatable issue
Yeah.
that resonates with many in the diaspora, especially those with family members studying abroad.
He talks about collaborating with existing government structures to advocate for better housing options. And it's interesting that he doesn't suggest creating new legislation or taking some kind of radical action.
It ties back to that pragmatic approach we discussed earlier.
Right.
He's focused on working within the system,
Yeah.
leveraging his potential position to push for positive change.
Makes you wonder, though,
Yeah.
is that enough? Can real change happen without challenging the status quo?
That's the age-old question, isn't it?
Right.
Reform versus revolution.
Yeah.
It depends on your perspective.
Right.
Some people believe that lasting change happens gradually
Right.
through incremental improvements.
Yeah.
Others argue that you need to shake things up
Right.
to really make a difference.
It's fascinating how this single interview sparks so many broader questions
Absolutely.
about the role of the diaspora,
Yeah.
the nature of political change, and this delicate balance between pragmatism and ambition.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this deep dive so engaging. We're
Yeah.
not just analyzing one candidate or one election.
Right.
We're exploring a shift in how political power is perceived and wielded,
Yeah.
particularly in a world where borders are becoming increasingly blurred.
We've uncovered a lot about Sonko's strategy, his promises, his approach to representing the diaspora.
Yeah.
But there's one more point I want to touch on before we wrap up. He repeatedly mentions this concept of a new Senegal.
Yeah.
What do you think he's trying to convey with that phrase?
It's powerful rhetoric, isn't it?
Yeah.
It taps into this desire for change, this yearning for something better. He's painting a picture of a Senegal that embraces its diaspora,
Right.
recognizes their contributions,
Yes.
and creates opportunities for them to thrive both at home and abroad.
It's an appealing vision.
Yes,
Especially for those who feel like the old ways haven't served them well.
absolutely.
But it also raises the question of what this new Senegal would actually look like in practice.
Right.
How would it be different?
Yeah.
How would it address the complex realities of globalization, economic inequality, and social change?
Those are the million-dollar questions.
Right.
And ultimately, it's up to the voters to decide whether they believe in Sonko's vision and his ability to deliver on his promises.
We've examined Sonko's approach to engaging the diaspora,
Yeah.
from his savvy use of targeted media to his bold pronouncements and his pragmatic strategies.
Yes.
But what does it all mean for you, the listener?
I think the key takeaway is this.
Okay.
Don't just accept what you hear at face value.
Right.
Dig deeper. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Consider the complexities.
Right.
Because your vote, your voice, and your engagement matter.
We've given you a glimpse into Sonko's world and how he's attempting to navigate this evolving political landscape.
Yeah.
Now it's your turn to keep exploring.
Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions, to demand specifics,
Right.
and to envision the kind of future you want to see.
This deep dive has explored the challenges and opportunities facing the Senegalese diaspora and how one candidate is attempting to tap into their growing influence. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. So we've spent this deep dive really focusing on Abu Sonko.
Right.
But it's important to remember he's just one candidate
Absolutely.
in a much larger political landscape
Yeah. His campaign, however, gives us a fascinating window. Right.
into how political engagement is changing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the diaspora.
And we saw how Sonko strategically used Soninke to connect with the Soninke community,
Yes.
even incorporating Soninke phrases into his interview.
Yeah.
Do you think this kind of targeted outreach will become more common?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As the diaspora becomes more politically active,
Right.
politicians will have to adapt.
Yeah.
They can't just rely on these broad appeals anymore. They need to understand the nuances
Right.
of different diaspora communities, their unique concerns and their cultural sensitivities.
It makes me think about that concept of a new Senegal that Sonko kept mentioning.
Yeah.
What do you think that means for the diaspora?
That's a great question.
Is it about creating more opportunities for them to return?
Right.
Or is it more about recognizing their contributions even if they remain abroad?
I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's about acknowledging that the diaspora is a vital part of Senegal's present and future.
Right. Regardless of where they physically reside,
Right.
it's about creating a more inclusive definition of citizenship.
Right.
One that recognizes the multiple identities and affiliations that many in the diaspora hold.
It's almost like we're seeing a shift from this idea of brain drain
Yeah,
to brain circulation,
exactly.
where the diaspora's knowledge and skills can benefit both their home country
Yes.
and their adopted country.
It's a win-win situation. And
Yeah.
Sonko seems to be tapping into that.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about attracting the diaspora back to Senegal.
Right.
He's also talking about supporting them wherever they are and
Right.
facilitating their contributions to Senegal's development.
It's a complex issue,
It is.
and there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
But I think it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely.
You know, what does it mean to be a citizen in a globalized world? How do we balance our ties to our home countries
Right.
with our lives in our adopted countries?
Those are questions that each individual in the diaspora has to grapple with.
Right.
And I think it's exciting to see candidates like Sonko acknowledging those complexities
Yeah.
and trying to engage with the diaspora in a more nuanced way.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think the most important thing is to be informed and engaged.
Okay.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Right.
Do your own research,
Yeah.
listen to different perspectives, and most importantly, participate in the process.
Yeah.
Whether it's voting, advocating for change, or even running for office,
Right.
your voice matters.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah,
This deep dive was just a starting point.
it was.
Now it's up to you, the listener, to continue exploring.
Keep diving.
Dive into the issues that matter to you.
Yes.
Learn about the candidates and their platforms. And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo.
Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. We have the power to shape it.
Yeah.
And that power is amplified when we engage, when we connect, and when we raise our voices.
So keep diving deep, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of your own voice.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us.